Some inherit money, some inherit memories, and some inherit things that were never meant to be found. When the phone rang that afternoon, Leo Whitman, a project manager living in a cramped Seattle apartment, had no way of knowing it would quietly rewrite everything he believed about his family, his past, and the man he thought he knew as his father. By the time he would step through a forgotten doorway hidden deep in the wooded hills of rural West Virginia, it would already be too late to pretend this was all just a mistake. The call came while he was in between jobs, sitting alone in a quiet room sorting through emails. The voice on the other end was calm, official, almost bored. The man introduced himself as a representative from the Marlow County Clerk's office and explained he was calling regarding paperwork that needed to be signed for a property Leo had inherited. At first, the words didn't register. Then he laughed. He told the man there had to be some kind of mistake. He hadn't inherited any property. No house, no land, nothing. As far as he knew, his parents had never owned a house in any village, especially not one located across the country, on the opposite side of the United States. The man on the phone paused. Papers shuffled. According to their records, the property belonged to him now. Leo explained again, slower this time, that his father had passed away 3 months earlier, and that neither he nor his mother had ever mentioned owning a house anywhere. There had been no letters, no keys, no conversations hinting at something hidden. He told the clerk he was confident this had to be an error. The clerk remained polite but firm. He suggested that mistakes could happen, but that the documentation was very clear. He invited Leo to come in person the following day to review everything and sort it out. That night, the thought lingered longer than it should have. The next morning, he went to the county office expecting an easy correction, a name mix-up, a wrong file, something simple. Instead, he watched as the employees pulled out old folders, worn edges softened by time. They laid documents on the desk, one by one, explaining calmly that the previous owner of the house was his father, Robert Whitman, and before that, his grandfather, Arthur Whitman. He felt a slow unease crawl up his spine. He told them, again, that this made no sense. His parents had never spoken about owning a house, let alone one in a distant Appalachian village. There was no reason to keep something like that secret, especially from him. The workers exchanged looks and slid the papers closer. There it was. His grandfather's name, written decades ago. A purchase agreement for a house on Hollow Creek Road. Then, years later, an inheritance transfer to his father. And finally, the most recent document, already prepared, listing him as the next legal owner. Everything was official, verified, stamped. He stared at the papers longer than he should have. If this was a secret, it had been kept perfectly. With no legal reason to refuse and no explanation that made more sense, he signed. The pen felt heavier than it should have. The house was now officially his. He left the office with a folder under his arm and questions he didn't know how to ask. For days afterward, he replayed memories of his father, conversations, holidays, long drives. Not once had there been even a hint of a second home, a distant village, or a family property hidden away. Part of him wondered if it had been planned as a surprise, something meant to be revealed later. Eventually, work took over. His job required constant travel, moving from place to place, project to project. Long hours, little sleep, no time to sit with unanswered thoughts. He placed the folder into a box with other documents and let the mystery fade into the background, until it didn't. After finishing a demanding job, he and his colleague and closest friend, Mark Dawson, suddenly found themselves with 10 days off. They decided to celebrate and went out to a restaurant. The night was relaxed. Drinks came and went. Conversations drifted from work to life to random stories. At some point, they began talking about houses, about inheritances, about families. That's when Leo remembered. Casually at first, he mentioned that he had inherited a house. Mark looked at him with surprise and asked where. When Leo said it was in West Virginia, the surprise turned into confusion. Leo explained everything: the phone call, the county office, the papers tracing the house from his grandfather to his father, and now to him. He admitted he had never known the house existed. Mark couldn't understand how that was possible. He asked why his parents never mentioned it, whether it could still be a mistake. Leo told him it wasn't. The paperwork was real, signed, verified. And that was what bothered him most, that his father had never said a word about it. Not once. They stayed at the restaurant another 30 minutes discussing possibilities, family secrets, forgotten places, stories lost to time. Then Mark leaned back and said something simple. "Why don't we go see it?" They had 10 free days, no obligations, and maybe, somewhere out there, answers waiting behind an old front door. The next morning, they packed the car and started the long drive east. Hour after hour passed. Cities gave way to open roads. The scenery changed slowly, then dramatically. The flat Midwest gave way to the rolling foothills and dense forests of Appalachia. The further they went, the quieter everything felt. Eventually, they turned onto Hollow Creek Road, a narrow gravel track barely marked on the map. That's when he saw it. A roofline, barely visible through dense trees. The house sat hidden behind overgrown rhododendron bushes and tall grass, as if the land itself had been trying to erase it. Nature had wrapped itself tightly around the structure. No clear path, no sign of recent care. They looked at each other and joked nervously. It looked like no one had been there in decades. Pushing through branches and weeds, Leo made his way to the front door. The wood was weathered, the handle cold beneath his hand. He turned it. The smell hit them the moment they stepped fully inside. It wasn't just dust or old wood. It was something heavier, stale in a way that felt almost alive. The kind of air that clung to the back of the throat, thick with years of silence. It made it instantly clear that no one had truly lived there for a very long time. Not recently, not comfortably, and yet the house didn't feel empty. They took a few cautious steps forward, their footsteps echoing softly through the interior. The floor creaked beneath their weight, but not in a way that suggested collapse. The house felt sturdy, maintained, at least at some point, preserved in a strange, unsettling way. That's when they saw it. In the middle of the main room stood a wooden table. It wasn't pushed against a wall or forgotten in a corner. It was placed deliberately, as if it were meant to be seen the moment someone entered. The surface was mostly clean, untouched by rot or mold. And on top of it sat two objects: a Bible, and a necklace with a small metal cross. They stopped walking at the same time. Neither of them spoke. The necklace wasn't tangled or discarded. It was laid flat, carefully positioned beside the Bible, as if someone had taken their time arranging it. The cross reflected a faint glimmer of light from the doorway. Slowly, they looked at each other. No words were needed. The more they were learning about this house, the stranger it became. This wasn't what an abandoned place was supposed to feel like. There was no chaos, no signs of panic, no broken furniture or scattered belongings. It felt paused, like someone had stepped away in the middle of something important and never returned. They joked lightly, trying to break the tension, commenting on how every new detail made the house feel more and more unsettling. But behind the jokes was something darker, a growing fear they didn't want to acknowledge out loud. The thought crept in quietly. Maybe there was a reason he had never known about this house. Maybe he wasn't supposed to. Still, logic won, for now. They agreed that whatever this place was, it deserved to be taken care of. Letting it rot beneath bushes and trees didn't feel right. This wasn't just some forgotten structure. This was a house that had belonged to his grandfather, then his father. A house that should have had life in it. They drove to the nearest town, bought cleaning supplies, tools, food, and brought their luggage back with them. Since the drive had been long and the day nearly over, they decided to sleep there that night and start fresh in the morning. Neither of them said it, but sleeping there felt strange. Still, exhaustion made the decision easier. The next day was harder than either of them expected. Neither had any real experience trimming land, especially not something this wild. The bushes were thick and stubborn, the branches tangled together like they'd been growing unchecked for decades. Some trees had grown so close to the walls that their branches scraped against the house when the wind moved. They worked for hours. Sweat soaked their clothes. Their hands ached. Their arms felt like lead. Every few minutes, one of them had to stop just to catch their breath. They hadn't realized how much effort it would take to reclaim something nature had already claimed. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they were nearing the end. As the final bushes fell away, the house began to show itself fully for the first time. And it was beautiful. The structure was solid, a classic two-story farmhouse. The way it sat against the land made it look intentional, like someone had chosen that exact spot for a reason. The windows caught the light just right. The porch looked worn but welcoming. They stood there in silence, exhausted, staring at it. Why would anyone hide this? Why would his father never mention it? Too tired to explore the neighborhood, they went back inside and fell asleep quickly, their bodies giving out before their minds could. The next morning, they drank coffee and ate breakfast quietly. The questions were still there, hanging between them like unspoken words. Finally, they decided the only way forward was to talk to the neighbors. They walked to the nearest house, a small cabin a quarter-mile down the road. An old man answered the door. He looked them over carefully, his eyes sharp despite his age. He asked who they were, where they came from, and what they needed. They apologized for disturbing him and explained they had a few questions, only if he was willing to answer. At first, the man was polite, calm, almost friendly. Then they mentioned the Whitman place. The change was immediate. The man's expression shifted so fast it was unsettling. His mouth tightened, his eyes hardened. Without saying a single word, he closed the door. A moment later, they heard the lock slide into place. They stood there, staring at the door, unsure of what had just happened. They tried another house, then another, and another. 5, 6 houses in total. Every encounter followed the same pattern. Warm greetings, willing conversation, and the moment they mentioned the house on Hollow Creek, the reaction changed. Doors closed, sometimes slowly, sometimes abruptly, but always with the same finality. They walked back toward the house in silence. Nothing about this felt normal. First, a hidden inheritance, then a house swallowed by nature. Now, an entire hollow refusing to even acknowledge its existence. They tried to rationalize it. Maybe there had been conflict, old arguments, something that made people uncomfortable talking about his grandparents. But Leo said it out loud. His grandparents were good people. There was no way they had been in constant conflict with everyone. That night, they searched the house again. Every room, every corner, every cabinet and drawer. Nothing. No photos, no letters, no personal belongings that explained anything. Later, they sat by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the forest and hills nearby. The hollow was quiet. Too quiet. They wrote theories on paper, listing possibilities, trying to make sense of everything. Hours passed. It was well past midnight when they realized something that made their stomachs drop. They hadn't moved any closer to answers. They knew exactly as much as they had on day one. Nothing. Eventually, exhaustion won again. They stood up from their chairs, and then they heard it. A laugh. Soft, clear, right beneath the window. They froze. Mark asked quietly if Leo heard it too. He had. They looked outside. Nothing. Just moonlight, trees, and shadows. They turned on their phone flashlights and stepped outside. The yard was empty. No movement, no footprints, no sound. Mark whispered that everything about this place felt wrong, that he was scared. The hollow was filled with old people, grandmothers and grandfathers. But the laugh they heard didn't sound old. It sounded young, like a girl. They convinced themselves it was nothing and went back inside. The rest of the night passed without incident. In the morning, Leo woke up and saw Mark standing in the living room, holding something white in his hands. It was a dress, thin fabric, old, hanging loosely, something like a communion dress. Leo asked what it was. Mark told him he had woken up early to make coffee and found the dress hanging from the window latch. They stared at each other. That dress hadn't been there the night before. Not when they arrived, not when they searched the house, and neither of them had brought it. Mark didn't sleep much after finding the dress. In the dim morning light, while the house still felt cold and quiet, he finally said what had been sitting in his chest all night, that something in this place wasn't right. Not broken, not abandoned, but wrong. Like the house itself was watching them learn too much, too quickly. He said he didn't want to spend more time there than necessary. Leo tried to laugh it off. He said maybe someone from the Hollow had seen them arrive. 2 outsiders, city kids, and thought it would be funny to scare them. Old people had strange ideas sometimes. Maybe it was all some twisted joke. But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. Mark looked at him and asked quietly if he really thought someone that old would go through the effort of staging things like that. Hanging dresses, creating noises, laughing outside windows in the middle of the night. "There are barely any people left here," he said, "and none of them look capable of something like this." They spent the day the same way they had spent the day before, sitting at the table, papers spread out, notes scribbled and crossed out, theories written down only to be erased minutes later. Every idea led back to the same place. Nowhere. It felt like walking in circles inside their own minds. No matter how much time passed, they were no closer to understanding why the house had been hidden, why the neighbors refused to speak, or why strange things were happening only after sunset. The answers stayed just out of reach, like they were being intentionally withheld. Eventually, Mark pushed the papers aside. He said maybe they were doing this wrong, that sitting inside the house waiting for clues wasn't helping. The house belonged to Leo now. If he wanted answers, maybe he needed to explore the land around it, the forest, the hills. "Let's at least enjoy the place," Mark said. "It's beautiful here. We can't keep sitting inside waiting for something to happen." Leo agreed. They decided that the next day they would go out and explore the surrounding area, walk further, look beyond the immediate hollow. Maybe the land itself would tell them something the people wouldn't. That night, the house felt different, quieter than before, heavy. The air didn't move much, even with the windows cracked open. When they finally went to bed, sleep came slowly. Sometime around midnight, Leo woke up. At first, he didn't know why. His eyes opened suddenly, heart beating faster than it should have. The house was silent. No wind, no sounds from outside. He told himself he just needed the bathroom. He stepped into the hallway. The moment he opened the door, his body froze. A few meters in front of him stood Mark. He was upright, completely still, facing him directly. He didn't blink. Beside him stood 3 girls. They wore identical white dresses, long, pale, thin fabric that moved slightly even though the air felt dead still. The dresses looked old. Not dirty, not torn, just out of time. The girls were smiling, laughing, softly at first, then louder. Leo's first thought was that he was dreaming. He whispered Mark's name. No response. Mark's eyes were open, fixed directly on him, empty in a way that made his stomach tighten. The girls leaned slightly toward him, their laughter echoing strangely against the walls. A cold wind rushed through the room as one of the windows opened violently. The curtains lifted. The girls' dresses moved with the sudden air, flowing unnaturally around their legs. He asked what this was. He told Mark to stop. He said this wasn't funny anymore. He turned his head for just a second, to grab his phone, to turn on the flashlight. Behind him, something fell. Hard. When he turned back, Mark was on the floor. The girls were gone. The laughter stopped as if it had never existed. He rushed forward, kneeling beside Mark, shaking him, calling his name. Mark groaned and slowly opened his eyes, confused and disoriented. "What happened?" he asked. "Why am I on the kitchen floor?" Leo stared at him, heart pounding. He asked if he remembered anything. Standing in the hallway, the girls, the laughter. Mark looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "What girls?" he asked. "I went to bed. I fell asleep. That's all I remember." Leo tried to explain. He described the dresses, the same ones found earlier. He said he had turned around for his phone and heard something fall. "That was you," he said. "You collapsed." Mark's face went pale. Not disbelief, fear. He said that in the morning they needed to find a church, somewhere holy, somewhere protected. Whatever was attached to this house wasn't just lingering, it was active. Leo finally said what had been forming in his mind since the beginning. He thought he finally understood why his parents had never talked about this house. They didn't sleep after that. Leo couldn't stop thinking about the girls, how real they had felt, how Mark remembered nothing, what they wanted. When morning came, neither of them felt rested. They packed quickly and went out, searching for a church nearby. They drove for a long time before they finally found one, nestled in a valley a few towns over. St. Bridget's. Old stone walls, a heavy wooden door. They knocked. Before they could say anything, the priest spoke from inside. "What have you brought with you?" They froze. When they asked how he could know, the priest opened the door. He was old, with a long white beard, holding a rosary tightly in his hand. "I've spent my life serving God," he said. "Bad things can be smelled from far away." The priest opened the heavy door wider, letting them step inside. The air was thick with incense and the faint smell of candle wax. Shadows stretched across the walls. The man's voice carried a weight that made Leo feel immediately small and exposed. "I do not need to know all the details," the priest, Father Malachi, said, his eyes scanning the two visitors. "I know about the house on Hollow Creek. I knew the people who lived there, and why they left." Leo swallowed hard. Why did they leave? Father Malachi's eyes darkened. "They left because the house carries a presence that is not of this world. Something that attaches itself to those who enter. Something that follows bloodlines. That is why your parents did not speak of it, and why the neighbors will not speak of it either. Some things are not meant to be disturbed." Leo felt his stomach twist. "But why me? Why now?" The priest shook his head. "You did not choose the house, but it has chosen you. By coming to it, you have inherited more than the walls and the roof. You have inherited what was left behind, and that is dangerous. You carry the attention of what remained." The priest reached into a small satchel and pulled out a thin bundle of papers and a small vial of clear liquid. "This," he said, handing the items over carefully, "is what you will need. There are graves, 3 graves, near the forest, close together. The girls, once alive, were cursed, bound to this land by a spell from one who was wronged generations ago. They appear in their white dresses to those who awaken the house. To you, they are alive. To others, they are not seen. To return balance, they must be freed. And until they are, you are in danger." Mark leaned forward, hands gripping the pew. "What do you mean? What danger?" Father Malachi looked at them both with steady eyes. "The energy you disturbed will follow you until it has your soul. It will not stop. It will not relent. Your father, your grandfather, they faced it. Your father's heart attack, was it just illness? Some survive the attention, some do not." The words hit harder than any blow. Leo's mind raced, connecting dots that had always been invisible. "Do you understand what this means?" the priest continued. "You cannot run. You cannot hide. You must act, and you must act precisely as I tell you. Tonight, before midnight, you will go to the graves. You will bring these items." He gestured to the rosary, the vial, and the folded papers. "Rosary in the right hand, holy water in the left. Follow the instructions exactly. Pour the water over the graves in the shape of a cross. Recite the prayers written for you. Free them. Only then will the presence leave you." Leo's stomach churned. "Graves? Where? How will I know which ones?" "You will recognize them," the priest said. "You will see. And when the clock strikes midnight, you must leave exactly as instructed. Nothing more, nothing less. The house will attempt to claim you, but with this, with faith, you may survive." The priest paused. "Understand this. When you disturb something that was hidden, there is always a cost. You must act." Leo nodded silently. There was no courage left in him, only determination laced with fear. Mark echoed the sentiment with a simple nod. "You must leave now," the priest continued. "Go, prepare, and when night falls, do not hesitate. Move swiftly. The longer you linger, the stronger it becomes. And remember, once you begin, you cannot stop. Failure is not an option." They thanked him quickly and left. The cold mountain air felt like a slap after the heavy air of the church. They drove in silence back to Hollow Creek. The forest loomed like a black wall. The air seemed thicker, as though it had anticipated their return. That day passed in tense preparation. They examined the papers and memorized the instructions. The house, silent for most of the day, seemed to shift as evening approached. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. The familiar creaks grew sharper, as if listening. As the sky darkened, Leo looked out the window. The trees swayed without wind. Somewhere in the distance he thought he heard laughter, faint, distorted, carried on the wind. "This is insane," Mark said. "We should have left." When midnight approached, they gathered the rosary, the vial, and the papers. The moon barely broke through thick clouds. They used their phones to light the overgrown path toward the small family cemetery at the edge of the property, a place they'd missed in their earlier explorations. The air carried the scent of wet earth and decay. Finally, in the darkness, he spotted the markers. 3 small, weathered headstones, side by side, nearly swallowed by ivy. Names and dates were eroded away. He crossed himself, knees trembling, and whispered the prayers the priest had written. Rosary in his right hand, holy water in his left. He poured the water over the first grave, the second, the third, carefully forming crosses over each. The girls' faces from his vision flashed in his mind. He spoke the words exactly as written, each syllable heavy in the cold night air. A wind rose suddenly, scattering dry leaves. The ground trembled faintly. Shadows shifted. And then, slowly, the air cleared. The sense of pressure, the feeling of eyes on him, lifted. For the first time in hours, he felt almost normal. They ran back toward the house. In front of the door, they saw Father Malachi, waiting calmly with a Bible in hand. He ushered them inside. Immediately, the doors and windows of the old farmhouse slammed open with a deafening crash. Glass shattered. Whispers and voices filled the rooms, chanting, moaning. The priest began reciting prayers aloud, and the words carried through the house like fire, burning through the darkness. The presence shrieked in frustration, its voices louder, sharper. "Amen!" the priest shouted finally, and with that, silence. Leo's chest heaved as he collapsed onto the old couch. Mark helped him sit, both of them pale, exhausted, trembling. "You are free," Father Malachi said quietly. "The danger is gone, but you must continue to respect what you cannot see. Never forget." Days later, Leo and Mark gathered their savings and helped renovate the aging St. Bridget's. People from the surrounding hollows slowly began visiting again, thanking the priest for removing the shadow that had lingered for generations. Leo had the land around the Hollow Creek house cleared properly, and fruit trees were planted. The house was restored, becoming serene and full of light. Years later, Leo sat in the warm sunlight filtering through the young orchard, reflecting on everything that had happened. He understood, finally, that some paths are placed before you, and some dangers are never avoided, only confronted. He had learned that fleeing is never the answer. Only faith, courage, and action could see one through the darkness.